3 days. That was all the time Rowena had left before her body stopped belonging to her. She sat before the tall mirror in her chamber, and the woman staring back did not look like a woman at all. She looked like a portrait someone had painted badly. Pale where there should have been color. Hollow where there should have been light. Her chestnut hair fell in waves down her shoulders, the way her governess had always arranged it, the way that was supposed to make her look like a prize. And that was the word, wasn't it? Prize. Because that was what she was to them. Not a daughter. Not a woman of 20, with a whole life uncoiled and waiting inside her. A prize to be handed across a table, sealed with wax, delivered to the highest bidder. In 3 days she would belong to Lord Mordecai. The thought struck her the way it always did. Sudden, physical, a fist closing around her lungs. 72 hours until her father would place her hand into the spotted, trembling hand of a man old enough to have buried 2 wives already. She remembered the betrothal dinner. She remembered how Mordecai's fingers had brushed her cheek as though he were testing fruit at market, as though he already owned the right to touch whatever pleased him. She remembered the way his gaze had crawled over her slow and certain, and how her stomach had turned so violently she had nearly disgraced herself at the table. You will survive this, she had told herself that night. Because women survived. Women had always survived. Except surviving was not the same as living. And Rowena had tasted living once in secret, in the dark, in the space of a few stolen months. She knew the difference now, which was the cruelest thing of all. Because you cannot mourn a thing you never knew existed. But she had known. She had held it in her hands. His name was Corwin, the son of a blacksmith. A common man with common hands and an uncommon smile. And she had loved him the way only a girl of 20 raised behind stone walls could love. Recklessly, completely, without a single grain of doubt. She remembered the moonlit garden and their fingers laced between the rose bushes. She remembered the kisses stolen behind the stables where the smell of hay and iron clung to his shirt. She remembered the letters folded, small, hidden between the pages of her books. Words she had read so many times, the ink had begun to fade beneath her thumb. "Let us run away," he had written. In the last letter. 3 weeks before her father announced the engagement to the entire hall. "I will find a way. Trust me." And she had trusted him. Heaven help her, how she had trusted him. A knock. Soft. 3 raps against the heavy door, and Rowena's heart leapt into her throat before she remembered the signal was hers. It was Tilda, the youngest of the maids, barely more than a girl herself, the only soul in that whole cold castle who had agreed to help her. Not for gold, though Rowena had promised her gold, but because Tilda had seen the way Mordecai looked at her mistress, and something in her plain, kind face had refused to let it happen quietly. Tilda slipped inside and shut the door. She carried a tray of tea that neither of them would touch because that was the way of it in a house like this. You carried a tray so that if someone asked why you had gone to the young lady's chamber, you had a reason in your hands. The guards at the East Tower changed their shift within the hour. Tilda whispered, her eyes darting to the door and back. "You'll have 15 minutes, maybe less, to cross the servants' corridor and reach the tunnels. 15 minutes. 15 minutes between a cage and the open sky. Between a life that had been choking her since the day she was born, and one clean, dizzying lungful of air that would finally be hers. And Corwin, did you deliver my message?" Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. "I put it in his hand myself, this morning." Tilda nodded quickly. "He said he'd be waiting at the tavern on the edge of the village, just as you asked." Relief and fear rose together in Rowena's chest, warm and cold, at once tangled so tightly she could not tell which was which. "He will be there," she told herself. "He loves me. This will work." But there was a small voice inside her. There was always a small voice, the one she had been drowning for weeks, the one that whispered now, treacherous and quiet. What if it doesn't? She shoved it away. Hard, because she could not afford it. Not now. Not after weeks of memorizing every patrol, counting every guard, hiding every coin and every jewel she had ever been given, one by one, until the velvet pouch tied at her waist grew heavy as a stone. Everything she owned in this world. Every piece of gold, every gem gathered since she was a child. "And I will give it all to him," she thought. Every coin, every jewel. Because without Corwin, it is only metal. It is only nothing. "My lady," Tilda touched her arm, gentle. "There's still time to change your mind. If your father catches you. If the guards find us, then they find us." Rowena's voice came out steady, steadier than she felt. "But I have to try, Tilda. I have to choose my own fate, even if it's only for one night." Tilda's eyes filled. She did not argue. "May the love you're running to be true," she whispered. "May it be true." The words followed Rowena into the dark. She knew the tunnels the way she knew her own hands. Because she had found them as a child, those narrow, dusty passages her governess would have called improper for a lady, and she had played there for hours, pretending to be an adventurer, pretending to flee from dragons that lived only in her books. How many times had she crouched in that cramped stone throat of the castle, giggling, certain the whole world was a game. She had never once imagined she would use these tunnels to flee a real dragon, one that wore her own father's face. Lord Aldrich of Valamore was not a monster. That was the thing people never understood. He did not beat his servants. He did not rage. He ruled his lands with a calm, unhurried hand, and men respected him for it. But his ambition was a cold thing, a calculating thing, and his only daughter had never once been a person to him. She had been a piece. A move on a board he had been playing since before she was born. Marriage to Mordecai would bring land, influence, an alliance that would push Valamore higher among the northern houses. That was all she had ever been for. 20 years, she thought, and the anger burned hot enough to push the fear aside for a breath. 20 years they shaped me, polished me, taught me to dance and pour and smile and hold my tongue. All so I could be handed to whichever man served my father best. And no one, not once, had ever asked her what she wanted. The tunnel exit opened near the outer stables, far from the eyes of the main gate, and when Rowena pushed the old door and the cold night air struck her face, she nearly wept from the shock of it. Hay, horses, wind. Freedom carried on the smell of ordinary things. The village streets were empty at that hour. Most families were long gathered behind their doors, their windows glowing amber. Rowena kept her hood low and her steps quick, even in slippers that had never been made for running, and she did not slow until the tavern rose ahead of her. Warm light spilling from its windows, laughter leaking out into the dark. He will be there. Her hand found the pouch at her waist and pressed it once the way a woman might press a wound. This will work. I'll give him everything. We'll be gone before dawn, and by the time the sun rises, we'll be so far away, my father will never find us. She pushed open the door. The heat hit her first, then the smell, Beer and smoke and bodies pressed too close, the low roar of men throwing dice. Women weaving between the tables with tired smiles and heavy trays. No one looked twice at the hooded figure in the doorway. She was nothing here. She was no one, which was exactly what she needed to be. Her eyes moved across the room, searching. Where is he? Where? And then she saw him. Corwin sat in the far corner, leaning over a table, and he was smiling. That wide, easy, animated smile she had so rarely seen up close, the one that made her heart lift even now, even through the fear. He came. He really came. But the lift died in her chest because he was not alone. 2 other men sat with him. Strangers. And something in the way. Corwin sat loose and slow and utterly unhurried, sent a thread of unease crawling up her spine. They were supposed to leave at once. There was no time for this. Every minute she stood here was another minute for the guards to find her bed empty. Perhaps they're friends, she told herself. Perhaps he's arranged horses. Perhaps, but her feet had already stopped listening to her hope. Because instead of crossing straight to him, she slid sideways along the wall into the shadow of a thick wooden pillar, close enough to hear, hidden enough not to be seen. Just to be sure. Just to understand. It's only nerves, she told herself. It's only my imagination making shadows out of nothing. The voices reached her in pieces, at first half drowned in the noise. Then she leaned closer, and Corwin's words landed on her like stones dropped from a great height. She should be on her way by now, he said, glancing at the moon through the window. Probably crawling through those castle tunnels this very minute, thinking she's so clever. One of the men laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. And she truly believes you're running off with her. A blacksmith's boy and Lord Aldrich's daughter. She's convinced. Corwin leaned back, and his grin stretched wide, and something in it turned Rowena's blood to ice. You should see the way she looks at me. Like I stepped out of one of her ridiculous storybooks. Corwin, save me. Corwin, take me away. Corwin, I love you. He pitched his voice high, and mocking a cruel little mimicry of her own, and the men roared, No, no, this cannot be happening. So the plan holds, the older one said, wiping his eyes. We help you get her out. Play the loyal guards. Escort you north along the roads. Exactly. Corwin drank, satisfied. It'll look legitimate. She'll feel safe. Protected, even. And once we reach Thornwood Forest, the younger man leaned in, hungry. Corwin's smile turned to something with teeth. Then we take it. All of it. Every coin, every jewel that spoiled little brat's been hoarding since she was a child. We split it 3 ways. And we leave her there. Alone. Nothing in her hands and no way home. The older man's eyes glittered. A fortune, split 3 ways. More than a fortune, my friend. Corwin raised his cup in a mocking toast. Jewels from a noble house. Gold saved a lifetime. Enough to buy land. To live like lords in any village that'll have us. And all we have to do is smile at a lovesick fool for a few hours. And if she talks after... Corwin shrugged. The gesture was so careless, so easy, that it was almost worse than the words. Who'll believe her? A ruined, noble woman who ran off to meet a lover and got abandoned in the woods. They'll say she lost her mind from the shame. And even if someone believes her, we'll be long gone. Different realms if it comes to it. He looked out the window again, judging the moon. She'll be here any moment. I can't wait to see that look in her eyes. All that hope. It'll be almost too much fun. The 3 of them laughed low and easy, and the sound wound its way into Rowena's bones and lodged there. Her legs nearly gave out. She caught the pillar to keep from falling, pressed her hand hard against her own mouth, so that no sound could escape it, and stood there in the dark, while her whole life came apart. Months, months of it. The kisses, the promises, the letters she had pressed to her heart until the paper went soft. All of it a plan, all of it to rob her, and he had not even done it alone. There had been accomplices, a scheme, an elaborate, patient, laughing scheme, and she had walked into it wearing her whole heart on her sleeve like a fool in a story. The pain was not the ache she had imagined betrayal would be. It was physical, a crushing weight beneath her ribs that made breathing a thing she had to remember how to do. Tears rose hot and stinging, and she blinked them back furious, because not here, not in front of them, not one drop where they could see it. She took a step back. The room tilted. She had to leave. She had to get out before she shattered completely, before Corwin turned and saw her, and lifted that cruel performance up onto his face like a mask. She turned and walked blind toward the door. And then something happened inside her. Because as she moved, her hand brushed the pouch at her waist. The weight of it. Everything she owned. The very fortune 3 grinning men were counting on stealing from her with false smiles and a lie dressed up as love. And the pain began to change. It began to harden, to cool, to sharpen into something with edges. They will not have it. Not the gold, not the jewels, not the satisfaction of leaving her broken among the trees, not one more scrap of her. She pushed the door open and stumbled out into the night, and the tears came now silent and hot, sliding down her face, because there was no one here to see them. The moon hung thin overhead, a pale sliver against the black too bright still for the darkness swallowing her chest. She walked without direction. She only needed to move, to breathe, to put distance between herself and those voices laughing at her ruin. But the stones of the street were uneven, and her eyes were blurred, and she did not see the figure until she walked straight into him. The impact was solid, strong enough to knock her off her feet. She was going to fall, going to finally fully collapse, and a hand closed around her arm, firm, certain, stopping her before the ground could. Wait, the voice was low, deep, threaded with a weight of authority that made her go still before she knew why. But there was something under it, too. Something unexpectedly gentle, at odds with the strength of the grip. Please. Her own voice broke apart in her mouth. Please let me go. I have to leave. I have to. She pulled against the hand. It did not tighten. It did not hurt. But it did not let go either. You're crying. It was not a question. It was a fact, stated with a strange, quiet certainty, as though he had already decided he would not pretend otherwise. Rowena kept her eyes shut. It's none of your concern. Look at me. There was command in it. But there was something else, too. Something that sounded impossibly like it, cared about the answer. Fingers touched beneath her chin, the lightest pressure lifting her face. And she resisted, kept her eyes closed, turned away as far as she could from that gentle, insistent touch, until she was simply too tired to fight anymore. Until fighting was one thing too many. She opened her eyes, and the man before her stole the breath from her body. I was tall, a head and a half above her easily, with shoulders broad enough to fill the fine dark coat he wore. But it was his eyes that held her. Amber. Pure amber, glowing in the torchlight of the street, like something molten poured into gold, and they were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her forget for one whole second that she was supposed to be running. Blonde hair fell loose to his shoulders, and there was something in the way he stood, some absolute, unbothered certainty in his own strength, that whispered of nobility even before he spoke. "What happened?" he asked, softer now. And perhaps it was the shock still burning through her. Perhaps it was the despair of having nowhere left to go. Perhaps it was only that this stranger was looking at her as though he truly wanted to hear the answer, when her own father had never once cared to ask whether she wanted the life he was selling her into. The words came before she could stop them. "It happened," she whispered, her voice breaking into pieces. "Something terrible happened." He did not answer. He only waited. Patient, as though he had all the time in the world for the grief of a stranger crying in the street. And she fell apart. "I thought he loved me." The words spilled out of her in a rush, tears falling freely now. I risked everything. Everything. I planned it for weeks. I gathered every coin I had, every jewel, and I came here to run away with him, because I'd rather die free than live as the property of a man I can't even look at without wanting to be sick. A sob tore loose. She wiped it away, furious. But he was in there, with 2 other men, planning all of it. They were going to pretend to help me escape, make me feel safe, and then take everything, every coin, and leave me alone in the forest laughing, calling me a fool, calling me spoiled and stupid and naive. It was all a lie. Every promise, every kiss, every letter, all of it, a trap, to steal what was mine. She had not meant to say so much. She never spoke this way, not to anyone, and certainly not to a man whose name she did not even know. But it poured out of her, and she could not stop it, could not do anything but stand there in the wreckage of herself and let a stranger watch her burn. He listened to all of it, and something passed across his face as she spoke. Something that flickered in those amber eyes, low and dangerous. A heat that had nothing to do with pity. His fingers tightened just slightly around her arm. Not enough to hurt. Only enough that she felt some deep, coiled thing in him respond to her pain as though it were his own. When she finally stopped wiping at her face with frantic, angry strokes, he did not offer her the empty comfort she expected. He did not tell her it would be all right. He simply held on. Let his presence be a thing she could lean against. And waited. So it was Rowena who broke the silence in a way she never could have predicted. "You can't help me," she said. And it came out like a plea dressed up as surrender. "I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. Except—" Her hand went to the pouch. "Except this." He watched, silent, trying to understand where she was going. "It's gold, jewels, everything I own in the world." Fresh tears slid down her cheeks. I was going to give it all to him, to that liar. And now I don't know what to do. My father will find me when the sun comes up. And in 3 days, I'll be chained to Lord Mordecai for the rest of my life." She looked up at him, and he watched the exact moment despair turned into something reckless and bright. "But you," she whispered, studying him, taking in the coat, the bearing, the way the whole street seemed to arrange itself around him. "You're a nobleman. I can see it. The way you carry yourself, the way you stand. You have influence." Her hands moved to the pouch, and he watched still as she untied it. Torchlight caught the gold as she opened it and held it out to him, her hands shaking. "I have a fortune here." Her voice found some strange strength through the tears. She lifted her chin. "And I'll give you all of it." if you marry me." The stranger went very still. He looked at the pouch, then back at her face, bright with tears and lit by a courage that was both broken and unbreakable at once. "Please," she went on, taking his silence for refusal. "I know how it sounds. A stranger offering money to a man she's never met. But I don't have a choice. If I'm already married, if I already have a husband, my father can't force me. The contract with Mordecai will be void. He'll have no power over me at all." And then, to her astonishment, the man began to laugh. Not loudly, not cruelly. A low sound, quiet and genuinely amused, as though some private joke had just unfolded itself in front of him. "Why are you laughing?" Offense crept in beneath her confusion. "I'm not laughing at you." He shook his head, and something warm moved behind his eyes. "It's the irony, that's all." He took the pouch, and the casual way he weighed it in his palm, as though the gold meant nothing at all, should have told her something. She was too far gone to notice. "What if I told you," he said, "there is something more binding than any marriage, something no one, not your father, not this Lord Mordecai, not any man alive, could ever undo?" She blinked. "More binding than marriage." "Among my people," he said, and his voice dropped low and weighted, "there is the claiming bond, a connection older than papers and vows, recognized above any law that men have written down. Once it is made, it cannot be broken. Not by anyone, not ever." Her eyes widened. Something ancient stirred in the back of her memory. "The claiming bond," she repeated very quietly. "My grandmother told me stories about the old bonds, about how in the far days the wolves claimed one another through moon and blood. She said it stood above any noble law." She paused. "But I always thought it was a legend." "It is not a legend." He held her gaze. "It has only grown rare." She studied him. "And you know how to make it?" Yes. Her breath caught, because her grandmother had said something else too. She had said only the pure-blooded alphas still carried that knowledge. "You're an alpha," she whispered. It was not a question. "Yes." Rowena looked at this pouch in his hand, then at his face. And even now, even shattered, some clear and stubborn part of her mind refused to stop working. "Does it truly void the marriage to Mordecai? My father would have no power to take me back. The bond stands above any human agreement." His voice did not waver. "The moment it is complete, you fall under my protection. Your father will have no legal claim to force you. The contract dies the instant it is made." She turned it over, weighing every word. And this, she understood even then, was not an impulse. Not a girl throwing herself off a cliff. This was a choice. A conscious, deliberate choice. "And it's permanent," she said slowly. "My grandmother said once it was made, it could never be broken. That it tied two people together for the rest of their lives." Yes. He would not soften it. "It does." She stared at him for a long moment. And he let her. He watched the war she waged with herself, fear against necessity, doubt against desperate courage. She was afraid he could see it, of trading one cage for another. Afraid that this powerful stranger would only become a different kind of chain. But she looked into his eyes, and she saw the thing Corwin's betrayal had nearly convinced her did not exist in the world. Honesty, certain, with nothing hidden behind it, and still she chose. "I accept," she said, firm. "But it has to be my choice. I can't be handed over again. I need to offer something. I need this to be a bargain where I have power, where I'm not being taked, where I'm giving. There was something so fierce in it, so determined to keep hold of her own dignity, that the man's expression changed. Then I accept what you're offering, he said. Not because I need it, but because it matters to you that you gave it. Hope flickered in her chest, small and terrified. So you'll make the bond? Yes. He cupped her face gently, the way you might hold something you were afraid of breaking. But only if you say it again when you're calm. I will not trap you in one more kind of cage. I need to know you're sure. Not only that you're desperate. She held his gaze. She breathed. And when she spoke, there was iron under it. I'm sure. I want this. Then come. He led her down the street. And when they passed the mouth of a narrow alley, he stopped, his eyes catching on the shadows there. Castellan. A figure stepped out of the dark, broad, silent, loyalty and quiet strength rolling off him like heat off a stone. 2 men, the clearing to the north, the stranger said. We'll need witnesses. Castellan looked from him to Rowena, and his eyes widened just slightly. Your Majesty, go. The word carried absolute command. Castellan vanished. Rowena's mouth had gone dry. Your Majesty, she echoed. Why did he? The look the man gave her was calm, controlled, dominant but never cruel. Castellan has formal habits, he said. Pay it no mind. But she did mind. She minded very much. Because the word had planted something in the soil of her, a seed of a question she did not yet have the courage to dig up. The clearing opened beneath the thin crescent moon, its faint light lying soft across the grass. Castellan waited there with 2 more men, and the stranger turned his full attention back to Rowena. The bond is made with a bite, he said. Here. He touched lightly the place where her neck met her shoulder. The place my people recognize. My grandmother described it. Her voice was hushed. She said it was intimate. You'll feel my instincts, my emotions, and I will feel yours. His amber eyes did not leave her face. Deep and permanent. She drew a steadying breath. And you truly want this? Yes. And through some sense, she did not have words, for she felt that it was true. Absolute certainty radiating from him like warmth. Then do it. She lifted her chin. I choose this. He stepped closer. His hand settled on her shoulders. Last chance. I'm not changing my mind. A ghost of something crossed her face, fierce and almost amused through the fear. Keep your end of the bargain. He smiled. Then he swept her hair aside, baring the pale skin of her throat. The air thickened, charged with something vast, something that reached back past the castle. She had fled past her father's ambition, past the very idea of the men who thought they could own her. Under the moon, he said, I claim you. And he bit. The world exploded. Rowena gasped. Not from pain, from sensation. Heat surged out from where his teeth met her skin, spreading like molten fire through her veins, and her whole body came alive in ways she had no name for. Sounds sharpened. She could hear the wind whispering secrets through the leaves at the clearing's edge. His breath against her skin. And beneath it, impossibly, the beat of 2 hearts. 2. Drawing closer, closer, sinking toward each other until she could no longer tell which one was hers. And then came the wave of feelings that were not her own. Fierce satisfaction, a protectiveness so total it took her breath, a possessiveness that by all reason should have frightened her and did not, that instead made her feel for the first time in longer than she could remember safe, as though at last someone had looked at her and seen a thing worth guarding. When he drew back, his lips grazing the mark, Rowena was breathing hard, and the world had changed. Colors deeper, sounds clearer, and him, his presence a steady pulse living now somewhere inside her chest, like a second heart she had not been born with. "What?" Her voice failed. Her hand flew to her throat. "Is that you inside me? The bond, my feelings, and I feel yours." It was true. Through the connection, she felt his certainty, his strength, and that dark, possessive thing that should have scared her, and instead wrapped around her like a cloak in the cold. She closed her eyes and tried to sort through the storm of it. The pain of Corwin's betrayal was still there, raw and bleeding. But there was relief now, too. The crushing weight had lifted from her chest, and underneath it all, something she had almost forgotten the shape of. Hope. "It's so much," she whispered. "You'll grow used to it." She opened her eyes and met his, and through the bond, she felt something in him go quiet and still, as though the simple act of her looking at him had brought him a peace he had been missing for years. "It worked," she breathed. "My father can't force me any more." "No, no one can." His voice was low. "You're free." Free. Tears burned again. Not from grief this time. From relief so sharp it hurt in an entirely new way. "I chose this," she said, "and it worked." He drew her a little closer. "You were brave," he said, "and you'll never be alone again." She should have wondered at that. At the certainty in it, the promise buried under the plain words. But she was too spent, too hollowed out by the longest night of her life. "What do we do now?" she asked. He studied her face for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes that she could not read, some knowledge he was holding back gently, deliberately, the way you keep a gift hidden until the right hour. "Castellan and the others will see you safely back," he said. "But we'll meet again soon, sooner than you think." He paused, and a strange, mysterious smile touched his mouth. "And when we do, a great many things are going to change." He took her hands and pressed them firm and warm. "You made the right choice tonight," he said. "Trust that, and trust that whatever you learn tomorrow, I am on your side. Always." The weight in his words made her shiver. Through the bond, she felt layers of meaning she could not begin to untangle, feelings that ran far deeper than one night could account for. "I trust you," she said, and the words went through him like a blade of light. Trust. After what had been done to her tonight, after the betrayal that should have burned every ounce of trust out of her. Forever. She looked at him with clear eyes and offered it freely. She did not know what she had truly stumbled into. Not yet. Because her heart had been so fixed on Corwin, so shattered by the ruin of it, that when every instinct in the man had screamed one silent word, the moment she collided with him in the dark, she had been too blinded by pain to hear it. Mate. She is my mate. The beast in him had known before his mind could catch up. Known when she fell against him. Known when she opened those deep brown eyes, bruised and raw with grief. And she had felt nothing of it, because grief had drowned the call that rang through every fiber of his being. She is my Luna, and she has no idea. The irony of it was almost too perfect to bear. She had tried to buy a husband of convenience never once imagining she was pressing treasure into the hands of a man who had already decided that a single one of her breaths was worth more than every kingdom in the world. But he would wait. He would let her find it in her own time. Tomorrow would bring enough. His name, his crown, the weight of what he truly was. She did not need to carry the knowledge that fate had bound them before she could even choose. First, she needed to heal. First, the wound Corwin had torn open needed to close. And then, only then, would she come to see what he had seen from the very first heartbeat. "I don't even know your name," she said. He smiled, and it promised 100 things she could not yet imagine. "You'll learn tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he said. "For now, rest." The journey back was a dream she moved through without touching. Castellan and the two men treated her with a reverence that made no sense to her, bowing their heads, watching her as though she were made of something rare, and she was too tired to ask why. Through the bond, even at a distance, she felt him. Satisfaction, certainty, that fierce, unwavering protectiveness, and beneath it at last, a deep and settled peace. Back in her chamber, Rowena lay down without undressing, her hand pressed to the mark at her throat. It pulsed warm beneath her fingers, and through it, she could feel him still solid and constant as bedrock. "Who are you?" she thought, drifting. "Why did your man call you your Majesty? Why did they look at me like that?" But the questions could wait until morning. For the first time in weeks, for the first time since the day her whole world had narrowed to a single cruel countdown, Rowena of Valamore fell asleep without fear. What she could not have guessed, drifting there in the dark, was how completely the coming dawn would remake her. That the stranger she had tried to buy for a pouch of gold was the most powerful man in all the werewolf realms. That name was Kalen. That he was the Alpha King of Thornhaven, the most feared and the most coveted crown in 100 years of moonlit history. And that in a few short hours, in a great hall, packed with the very nobles who had watched her father sell her. That man would walk through the doors and turn her ruin into the beginning of everything, But that was tomorrow. Tonight, she only slept. And for the first time in her life, she slept as a woman who had chosen. Not as a prize, not as a daughter to be traded, as herself. And somewhere to the north, beneath the same thin moon, a king lay awake with his hand over his heart, feeling the faint, distant flutter of another heartbeat that had until this night been missing from his chest. He did not sleep at all. He only listened to it, and he smiled. The dawn came too soon. Rowena woke to a hand on her shoulder, and Tilda's voice, low and urgent, breaking through the last of her sleep. "My lady, you have to wake. Your father wants you in the great hall. Now." Rowena's heart lurched, and then before the fear could sink its teeth in, she felt it. A calm, a solid, steady presence pulsing somewhere beneath her ribs, certain as sunrise. Kalen, even at a distance, even with a stranger's name she did not yet know. The bond was an anchor she could not have described and could not have done without. "Why?" she asked, sitting up. "What's happened?" Tilda wrung her apron between her fingers. "There's a visitor. An important one. Every noble in the castle has been summoned. Your father says it's a matter of great diplomatic weight." She swallowed. "I've never seen him like this, my lady. He's frightened." Frightened. Rowena had lived 20 years under her father's roof, and in 20 years She had never once seen Lord Aldrich of Valamore afraid of anything, which meant whoever was coming was a person even her father could not control. "How long do I have?" "Half an hour. No more." She rose, and through the bond, faint and far, she felt something that might have been amusement. "What are you doing?" she thought toward it. "What are you plotting?" "Tilda. The green gown. The formal one. The high collar." The maid fetched it from the wardrobe. Dark velvet, the color of forest shadow. And as she laced Rowena into it, her eyes kept drifting to her mistress's face with a puzzlement she was too polite to speak. "My lady," she said at last, hesitant, "thank the heavens you gave up on running. If your father had discovered—" Rowena pressed her fingers once to the mark hidden beneath the collar. "I didn't give up Tilda," she said quietly. "I found a different way out." Tilda frowned, but she did not ask. She only smoothed the last fold of velvet into place, and she did not see the way her mistress stood a little straighter than she had the day before. A little more like a woman who owned herself. The great hall was full when Rowena arrived. Nobles from across Valamore, summoned at dawn, dressed in their finest, and whispering behind their hands. The air was thick with tension and expectation, the particular electric hush of people who know something is about to happen and cannot yet see what. Lord Mordecai was there. His heavy body was draped in silks, too rich for a man of his years, and when his eyes found Rowena across the hall, he smiled. That slow, possessive smile that curdled her stomach. "In 3 days I was meant to be his. In 3 days I was meant to belong to that. But not anymore," she thought, and something like triumph steadied her spine. Not ever. And Corwin was there, dressed as a servant, tucked in among the castle's workers, where he could watch and wait. When his eyes met hers, he had the audacity to wink. A small conspiratorial gesture. One liar to the fool he still believed she was. As if the trap were still sprung. As if she had not stood behind a pillar and heard every word. Rowena's anger did not flare hot. It went cold, clean, patient. "You'll answer for it," she thought, and looked away first because looking away first was its own kind of power. Her father stood at the center of it all, and Tilda had been right. Lord Aldrich was undone. He tugged at his collar, checked the positions of the guards, snapped at servants over nothing. Sweat shone on his brow despite the morning chill. "Rowena," he waved her closer, "you look presentable. Good. King Caelan of Thornhaven honors us with his presence for territorial negotiations. You will conduct yourself with perfect dignity. Do you understand me?" Rowena went very still, because her father was Lord Aldrich of Valamore, a powerful man, but not a king, and he was about to sit across a table from one of the most powerful kings in all the werewolf lands, King Caelan of Thornhaven. The name meant nothing to her yet, and everything to everyone else. "Yes, father," she said. "Stand there." He pointed to a place among the lesser nobles. "And do not speak unless you are spoken to." She obeyed. She took her place, and through the bond she felt a presence drawing nearer. Closer. Very close now. Her heart began to beat faster, and she could not have said why. Is he among the party? Is he already here? Watching. The minutes crawled. The hall held its breath. And then it happened, and it happened over nothing at all. Rowena shifted her weight, adjusting her stance, and the high collar of the green gown slipped. Just an inch, just enough. An older maid standing near her saw it first. Her eyes went wide. "My lady," she whispered, reaching, "your collar, it's fine." Rowena stepped back too late, because the woman had already caught the fabric, already straightened it in that fussing, well-meaning way of servants everywhere. And she had seen. The mark, deep, fresh, unmistakable. The maid gasped, and the sound was far too loud in the waiting silence of that hall. Lord Aldrich stopped mid-sentence in a conversation with a nobleman and turned. Sharp. "What is it?" The maid had gone the color of ash. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "My lord," she managed. "Your daughter. She bears a mark." Ice flooded Rowena's veins. The whole hall seemed to freeze, every conversation dying at once, every head turning toward the girl in the green gown. Lord Aldrich crossed the distance in furious strides. He seized his daughter by the shoulder, and without a shred of ceremony, without a heartbeat of hesitation, he yanked the collar down. The mark was bared for all to see. Perfect. Fresh. A claiming bite placed exactly where the old wolf law demanded it, silver pale and undeniable on the pale skin of her throat. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind you can drown in. Then Lord Aldrich erupted. "What is this?" His voice shook the rafters, disbelieving, furious. "Rowena, what have you done?" She lifted her chin. She would not shrink, not with every eye in Valamore upon her. "I took my own fate into my hands," she said. "Your own." His face went red, then a deeper, uglier shade. "You're marked with a claiming bond. Who dared touch you without my leave?" "No one touched me without my leave." Her voice held steady steel running through it. "I consented. Fully. Knowingly. I chose this." Mordecai had stepped forward, now his face twisting with something between rage and disgust. "She's ruined," he spat. "The contract is void." That was rather the point. Rowena turned to look at him directly, and she let him see it, all of it, the loathing she had swallowed at that betrothal dinner. "I'd take anything over belonging to you." The slap came fast. Her father's open hand caught her across the cheek, hard enough to snap her head to the side. Pain bloomed sharp and hot, spreading across her skin, and she tasted blood where the inside of her lip met her teeth. "You've ruined everything." Aldrich was shouting now, past all control. "Years of negotiation. Years of careful planning, and you destroy it, you throw it away for some ridiculous fantasy. Who was it? Tell me who it was, so I can put his head on a spike and end this farce." Rowena turned her head back slowly. She touched her burning cheek with 2 fingers, and through the bond, something shifted. Violently. A wave of fury, absolute and enormous, detonated somewhere in the distance, and rolled toward her like a storm front, and she understood with sudden clarity what it was. He felt that. He felt my pain. "You will not lay a hand on him," she said. And her voice, though quiet, carried to every corner of that frozen hall. "And he is not just any werewolf." "Then who?" Mordecai demanded, his jowls trembling. "Which insolent servant had the gall?" The great doors of the hall slammed open, and Rowena's world came apart and remade itself in a single breath. Kaelin stepped through, and there was nothing simple about him now. Nothing of the stranger in plain clothes on a dark street. He wore royal black threaded with gold fabrics that whispered of bloodline and power, a cloak spilling behind him like folded wings. His blonde hair was pulled half back from a face that was devastating and unforgiving all at once. And his eyes, those amber eyes that had looked at her with such gentleness in the moonlight, now burned like molten gold fury, rolling off him in waves so palpable that every werewolf in the hall took an involuntary step back. No, no, it cannot be. But it was. Castellan entered at his side, wearing the colors of Thornhaven, and behind them came a retinue of royal guards, each armed, each bearing the crest of the Northern Crown. The whole hall dropped as one into deep reverence. Nobles bowed. Servants knelt. The chaos of a moment before collapsed into perfect, terrified silence. Lord Aldrich went white as bone. He dropped to his knees so fast he nearly stumbled. "Your Majesty, I had no idea. We were expecting you, of course, but not so soon. Kaelin did not look at him. He did not look at anyone. His eyes went straight to Rowena, and the force of that gaze struck her like lightning down her spine. He crossed the hall in measured, unhurried steps, every movement heavy with authority and barely leashed rage, and the nobles peeled out of his path without being told self-preservation, moving their feet for them. Rowena stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the truth crashed over her wave after wave. The man I offered gold to, the stranger I proposed marriage to as though he needed my little pouch of coins, the one who accepted my desperate bargain in a dark street. He is King Kaelin of Thornhaven. Humiliation flooded through her, tangled up with shock. He knew, all along. He knew exactly what he was, while I stood there trying to buy him. But through the bond, that connection that now made such terrible, perfect sense, she felt his answer. And it was not mockery. It was fury at her pain. Satisfaction at finally at last revealing himself. And beneath, both deeper than both, one word that beat like a drum. Mine. Someone hurt what is mine. Kaelin stopped directly in front of her. So close she could feel the heat coming off him, the power radiating from his skin. And then, with a gentleness that clashed so violently against the storm, pouring through the bond that it nearly undid her, he lifted his hand and touched her cheek, where the red imprint of her father's palm still burned. His fingers were soft, but she felt the tremor of rage held back in them. "Who?" he said, and his voice came out low, quiet. It filled the silent hall to its farthest stones. "Dared to hurt you." Lord Aldrich, still on his knees, went a shade paler than seemed possible. The whole hall held its breath. No one answered. Fear hung in the air, thick enough to taste. Kaelin did not take his eyes from Rowena, but his next words went to the room. "I asked," he said, "who dared to lay hands on her?" The silence stretched. Heavy, suffocating. Finally a voice trembled up from the floor. It was I, Your Majesty. Lord Aldrich. I didn't know. I didn't know that she was yours." Kaelin turned, slowly. His eyes locked on to the kneeling lord. "You," he said. It was not a question. "You struck her." "I didn't know," Aldrich stammered. "She marked herself without permission. She ruined years of—" The word was cold as river ice. "So, you would have been within your rights to strike her if only she weren't mine. Is that what you're telling me?" Aldrich opened his mouth and found nothing in it, and closed it again. Kaelin turned back to Rowena, and with a deliberate motion, he swept the collar of her gown fully aside, bearing the mark for the entire hall to see clear and undeniable. "She bears my mark," he said, and his voice carried absolute authority. "She is my mate, my queen." He looked back at the man on the floor. And you have just made the mistake of raising your hand to her." The hall erupted in gasps. Queen. He called her queen. Through the chaos, Rowena heard the whispers race through the crowd like fire through dry grass. The king's mate. She'll be Thornhaven's Luna. King Kaelin has never chosen. In all these years, never once. "As for you," Kaelin said, turning at last to Mordecai, who stood trembling beside the dais, "and your contract, it is void. The claiming bond stands above any agreement men have written. I suggest you forget whatever claim you imagined you held over her." Mordecai shook his head so hard, his jowls swung. "No, your majesty. I claim nothing. I beg your forgiveness." "Out." Kaelin did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Get out of my sight." Mordecai fled the hall, his dignity trailing behind him in tatters, and no one moved to stop him. Kaelin turned back to Rowena, and when he spoke again, his voice softened, and it was only for her. "Are you all right?" The same question. The same impossible gentleness underneath all that fury. The very words he had asked her in the dark, before she knew he was anything but a stranger. She searched for words through the storm of it. "All this time. You're the king. You were always the king." "Yes," he said simply. "I always was." "I offered you gold." Shame scorched her face. "I proposed marriage to the richest king in the lands, as though a handful of coins could mean anything to you. And I accepted." His voice was low but steady. "Because you chose me, without knowing what came with the crown. You were brave enough to seize your own fate, to make a desperate proposal, but an honest one. And that matters more to me than any throne." Through the bond, she felt the truth of it. No mockery. Only deep, unshakable respect, and beneath it, that fierce, possessive thing that should have frightened her, and instead made her feel absurdly in the middle of a hall full of people who had watched her be struck safe. "Come," Kaelin said, and held out his hand. "You need to leave this hall, and I need to step away from your father before my patience runs out entirely." The threat in it was unmistakable. Rowena looked at the offered hand, at the hall full of stunned faces, at her father still on his knees, visibly terrified of the man who had come to marry his daughter. And she placed her hand in Kaelin's. He laced their fingers together firm and warm and turned to the hall. "The negotiations are postponed," he declared in a voice that allowed no argument. "My queen and I have matters to settle. Castellan will remain for preliminary discussions. I will return when I am ready." Castellan bowed his head, though surprise still lived in his eyes at everything he had witnessed. "As you command, your majesty." And Kaelin led her out. Their fingers interlocked his presence, steady and protective, through the bond. As the great doors closed behind them, Rowena heard the hall explode into frantic conversation, 100 shocked voices scrambling to make sense of the impossible thing they had just seen. But it did not matter anymore, because for the first time in her whole life, she was not alone. They did not travel to Thornhaven that day, nor the next. There were papers. There was the matter of her father, and the renunciation Castellan drew up, and the slow, careful business of untangling a life from the house that had held it captive for 20 years. Rowena moved through those days in a strange calm, the bond a quiet second heartbeat. She was still learning to hear. She and Kaelin spoke, not of thrones or crowns or the enormous thing that had happened between them, but of small things. She learned he had slipped out of his camp that night, because the weight of the crown had grown too heavy to carry one more evening. She learned he laughed rarely, and meant it when he did. She learned that when he looked at her, some tension he had carried for years seemed to unspool from his shoulders. She did not yet know why. Not fully. But she was beginning to wonder, and then on the fourth day, they rode north. The carriage carried her through country she had never seen, hills folding into deeper hills, forests darker and older than any near Valamore, until at last the land opened and Thornhaven rose out of it. A city of gray stone and high towers, wolves carved into every archway, banners of black and gold, snapping in a cold, clean wind. It was beautiful, and it was enormous, and it was, she understood with a sinking in her stomach, entirely foreign to a girl raised in a minor northern house. I am to be queen of this, she thought. Queen of all of this. And she felt for the first time since the clearing the ground shift beneath her certainty. Kaelin felt it through the bond and reached across the carriage to take her hand. They will love you, he said. She almost believed him. She was wrong. They did not love her. Rowena felt it the moment she entered the throne hall of Thornhaven on Kaelin's arm. The court had gathered to receive their king and the woman he had chosen, and the hall was full of wolves. Not men who happened to be wolves. Wolves. She could feel it now, through the bond, the great coiled power of them, the way they moved, the way they watched. And the way they watched her was not welcome. It was assessment. It was doubt. It was the cold, careful appraisal of people deciding whether she was worthy and finding before she had spoken a single word that she was not. A murmur moved through them as she passed. Human someone breathed, and the word carried a whole world of contempt. She could hear it now with her sharpened senses. She heard all of it. The pretty little human. Bought her way in, they say. Offered him gold like a merchant. And he took a mortal for a Luna. After all these years, a mortal. Rowena kept her chin high. She kept her steps even. But inside in the place, the bond could not reach something small and frightened, curled up tight. They think I bought him, she realized. They think I'm an opportunist, a grasping mortal girl who trapped their king with a pouch of coins. And the worst of it, the very worst of it, was that she could not entirely prove them wrong, because hadn't she offered him gold? Hadn't she stood in a dark street and tried to purchase a husband like a length of cloth at market? She knew the truth of her own heart, that it had been desperation and not greed, that she had given everything precisely because she valued nothing above her freedom. But they did not know that. They only knew the shape of it. A mortal. A fortune. A king who had never choosing suddenly a girl who had arrived with a bite on her neck and a purse at her waist. At the front of the hall, a man stepped forward. Older. Silver at his temples, robes heavy with the marks of high office, a chain of station across his chest. His face was smooth and pleasant, and his eyes were not. Your Majesty, he said, bowing to Kaelin with perfect practiced grace. Thornhaven rejoices at your return. He turned to Rowena, and the bow he offered her was a fraction shallower, just enough to be felt, not enough to be named. And this is the lady you have chosen. My mate, Kaelin said. Flat, a warning underneath it. My queen, Counselor Halbrook. Of course, Halbrook's smile did not waver. Forgive an old servant of the crown, his caution, your majesty. But there are matters of law that even a king must observe. The Luna of Thornhaven is not merely a wife. She is the heart of the pack, the mother of its bloodline. Her worthiness is not a matter of sentiment. It is a matter of the old law. Kaelin's jaw tightened, The bond is made. It stands above any law. The claiming bond, yes. Halbrook inclined his head. But a claiming bond made in haste upon a mortal before witnesses hastily gathered in a forest clearing. His eyes flicked to Rowena, and there was nothing warm in them, is not the same as a Luna recognized by the pack. The old law is clear, Your Majesty. A Luna who is not born of the blood must prove her worth. She must stand the right of recognition, before the full court, beneath the full moon, or the pack is not bound to honor her as queen. A murmur ran through the hall. Approving, hungry. Rowena felt Kaelin's fury rise through the bond, and she felt him fight it down, because to rage at his own counsel on her first day would only make her look weaker, would only prove she needed a king to shield her. And when, Kaelin said, each word carved from stone is the next full moon, Halbrook's smile widened just slightly. In 3 weeks, Your Majesty. 3 weeks. Rowena almost laughed, almost, because of course, because she had spent her whole life running from one deadline into another. And here was fate, handing her a fresh one, wrapped in the robes of a counselor. 3 days to Mordecai, and now 3 weeks to prove she deserved to exist in this place at all. But she did not laugh. She looked at Halbrook, and she made herself a small, quiet promise. I will stand your right, and I will pass it. Not for the crown, not even for him, but because I am done letting other people set the measure of me. She'll stand it, Kaelin said. I'll stand it, Rowena said at the very same moment, and Halbrook's smile flickered, just for an instant, because he had not expected the mortal girl to speak for herself. The 3 weeks that followed were the loneliest of Rowena's life. Kaelin was often away, pulled into the endless work of a king, the negotiations he had postponed, the disputes only he could settle. And when he was gone, Thornhaven closed around her like cold water. The servants were correct and distant. The nobles watched her the way you watch a fire you expect to spread. She ate alone. She walked the gray halls alone. And everywhere she went, the whispers followed soft enough to pretend she did not hear loud enough that she always did. She began to doubt. Not the bond, which pulsed warm and constant whenever Kaelin was near, but herself. The old question, one Corwin had planted, and her father had watered for 20 years, rose up again in the quiet dark. What am I worth? What am I really apart from what I can be used for? A daughter to be traded, a fortune to be stolen, a mortal who bought a king. Until one gray afternoon in the library where she had taken to hiding among books that reminded her of home, she found she was not alone. A woman stood among the shelves, tall, striking, dark hair coiled high, a gown of deep wine red, and the unmistakable power of a high-born wolf coming off her in waves. Rowena knew her by reputation already. Everyone did. Lady Vesper, the woman the whole court had once expected Kaelin to choose. So, Vesper said, not turning from the shelf, the mortal reads. Rowena's spine stiffened. The mortal reads a great deal. Vesper turned then, and her face was beautiful and cold, and something behind her eyes was tired in a way that Rowena, to her own surprise, recognized. Do you know what they say about you? Vesper asked. That I bought him. Rowena did not look away. That I trapped your king with a purse of gold. Yes, I hear it every day. In every hall. I imagine you say it too. Something flickered across Vesper's face. She had expected the girl to flinch. She had not expected her to name the wound aloud. "I say," Vesper answered slowly, "that a woman who arrives with a bite on her neck and a fortune at her waist is either very lucky or very clever, and Thornhaven does not forgive cleverness in a mortal." "I wasn't clever." Rowena's voice was quiet. "I was desperate. There's a difference. Though I don't suppose it matters to anyone here which one I was." And Vesper went still. Because that was not the answer of a schemer. A schemer would have preened or protested or spun a story. Only a woman telling the truth answered a cruelty with something so plain and unguarded. Vesper studied her for a long moment, and Rowena, watching her back, saw something she had not expected to see. She's tired, Rowena thought. Not proud. Tired. The way I was tired in that mirror 3 weeks and a whole lifetime ago. "They were going to marry me to him, you know," Vesper said, abruptly, as though the words had escaped before she could stop them. "My family. For years that was the plan. Vesper will be Luna. Vesper will bind our house to the crown. It was decided before I was old enough to understand what it meant." Her mouth twisted. "No one ever asked me. It was simply arranged. I was a bridge between 2 houses. That was all I ever was to them. A bridge to be walked across." And Rowena felt the floor of her own certainty tilt, because she knew those words. She had lived those words. A tool, a piece, a thing to be used for someone else's ambition. She had fled a castle in the dead of night to escape exactly the life this proud, cold, beautiful woman had been raised to accept. "I'm sorry," Rowena said. And she meant it. Vesper's eyes narrowed, suspicious of the softness. "It isn't pity." Rowena shook her head slowly. "It's recognition. My father sold me, too. To a man 3 times my age. I ran because I couldn't bear to be a bridge either." She touched the mark at her throat. "We're not so different, you and I. We were both born into houses that saw us as furniture. The only difference is I got out. And you're still expected to smile about it." The silence that followed was long and strange. And Vesper, who had come to the library that afternoon to take the measure of her enemy, found she could not quite locate the enemy any more. She looked at the mortal girl, at the mark on her neck, and the steadiness in her spine, and something old and defended in her chest gave the smallest, most reluctant crack. She did not say anything kind. She was not ready for that. But when she left the library, she did not sneer. And that in Thornhaven, in those gray and lonely weeks, was almost a kindness. Rowena did not sleep well that night, because something Vesper had said would not leave her. A bridge between 2 houses. It scratched at the back of her mind, an itch she could not reach until at last, deep in the small hours, it surfaced. Why would they marry Vesper to Kaelin? To bind 2 houses, she thought, when Vesper's house was already loyal, unless the marriage was never really about loyalty at all. Unless someone wanted Vesper close to the crown for another reason entirely. She rose. She could not have said what drove her, only that the bond was quiet. Kaelin away, again, on some matter of state, and the castle asleep, and the question would not let her rest. She walked the dark halls in her nightgown, with a single candle past the sleeping wolves and the carved archways, until she found herself near the council chambers, where a light still burned, and voices murmured behind a door not quite closed. Rowena stopped. Every instinct told her to turn back. Every lesson of her life told her that a woman who listens at doors learns things she cannot unlearn. But she had listened at a door once before. Behind a pillar in a tavern, and what she had heard there had saved her from ruin. So she crept closer, and she listened. Cannot simply refuse the right. Halbrook's voice, smooth, certain. The mortal will stand it, and she may even pass it. The king will see to that. No, the right is not where we win. Another voice answered, lower, and Rowena's blood went cold because she knew it. She had heard it snarl at her across a great hall 3 weeks ago. Mordecai. Then where? Mordecai said. Patience, Halbrook. There is a clause in the old law that even our king has forgotten. It can be shown that the bond was made through deception, that the mortal knowingly ensnared him, coerced him, bought him as the whole court already believes, then the bond is named false. And a false bond can be dissolved by the council, regardless of the king's wishes. And you can show this. I can arrange for it to be shown. A pause, and Rowena could hear the smile in it. The girl offered him gold, in front of witnesses in a forest. Half of Thornhaven already believes she trapped him. It will not be difficult to persuade the council that a desperate mortal facing a forced marriage of her own schemed her way into a crown. Once the bond is dissolved, she is nothing. A mortal with no house, no protection, no claim. And her father so very eager to see her wed to your lands. We'll hand her back to me. Mordecai's voice was thick with satisfaction. For the alliance he still wants, and the king will be free again, to choose a proper Luna. A Luna of the blood, Halbrook agreed, one whose house understands the value of a grateful counselor. Everyone gets what they want, my lord, except the mortal girl, and no one will mourn her. Rowena stood frozen in the dark corridor, her candle trembling in her hand. They mean to unmake me, she thought. Not with the right. Behind it. They'll call the bond a lie. Call me a schemer. Use the very thing the whole court whispers that I bought him, and turn it into law. And when I'm nothing again, they'll hand me back to Mordecai like a parcel returned to the wrong address. Her first instinct, hot and immediate, was to run to Kaelin, to pour it all out the moment he returned the plot, the names, the whole rotten thing, and let his fury burn it to the ground. But she stopped herself, because she had done that once already. She had run to a man for rescue, laid her whole fate in his hands, trusted love to save her. And that man had been Corwin, and it had nearly destroyed her. And even Kaelin, even good, honest Kaelin. If she ran to him now, weeping, and he swept in and crushed Halbrook with a king's wrath, what would the court say? What would they always say? That the mortal could not stand on her own. That she needed a king to fight her battles. That she was exactly the helpless, grasping girl they had already decided she was. No. No. Rowena blew out her candle. She stood alone in the dark, her heart pounding, and she felt something harden inside her. The same cold, clean thing that had turned her tears to iron in a tavern doorway 3 weeks ago. They want to prove I'm nothing without a man to hold me up, she thought. Then I'll prove I'm something without one. I found this. I heard it. And I will be the one to end it. Not the king, me. She would gather the proof herself. She would learn the old law herself. She would find the witnesses, the letters, the thread that tied Halbrook to Mordecai, to her own father, and she would pull it until the whole design unraveled. And she would do it quietly, patiently, in the weeks she had been given, so that when she stood in that hall, beneath the full moon, to face the right of recognition, she would not be standing there as a girl, begging to be believed. She would be standing there as a woman, with the truth in her hands. Rowena turned and walked back through the dark halls of Thornhaven, and she did not feel lonely anymore. She felt awake. And somewhere in the sleeping castle, the bond stirred, and she felt Kaelin far away, dreaming, and she pressed her hand to the mark at her throat and made him a silent promise he could not yet hear. "I'm not the girl who needed saving in that street," she thought. "Not anymore. When you come back, you'll find I've begun to save myself." Because for the first time, the thing counting down toward her was not something being done to her. It was something she was running toward. For those weeks, Rowena of Valamore stopped waiting to be rescued. She woke before the sun each morning, and she went to work. Not the work of a queen, not yet, because they had not let her be one. The work of a woman who had decided her own survival was her own responsibility and no one else's. She started with the law. Because Halbrook had spoken of an old clause, a forgotten thing buried in the wolf law, and Rowena understood that a weapon hidden in the dark could only be met by dragging it into the light. So she went to the one place in Thornhaven no one thought to guard. The library. The great cold room of shelves where the whispers could not follow her, where the oldest books of the pack sat gathering dust because no wolf in a generation had bothered to read them. She read them all, night after night, candle after candle, her eyes burning her back, aching her fingers gray with the dust of laws written before her grandmother's grandmother was born. She read the right of recognition, every word of it, until she could recite the whole ancient thing in her sleep. And then she read further, deeper, into the clauses Halbrook had counted on no one remembering, and she found it. The clause of false bonding. Just as he had said, a bond made through deception could be dissolved by the council over the king's objection. It was real. It was there. And it was exactly as dangerous as she had feared. But the law was a strange and honest thing, because on the very next page in the same faded hand, she found what Halbrook had not mentioned. The clause could cut both ways. A false accusation of false bonding, made in bad faith, made by a council member for personal gain, was itself the gravest crime a servant of the crown could commit. Betrayal of the pack, punishable by exile, by the stripping of all title, all land, all name. Rowena sat back in the dark and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for weeks. He built a trap for me, she thought, and he built it out of a law that will hang him if I can prove his bad faith. All I need is to prove he did this for gain, that he plotted with Mordecai, that the whole thing was a scheme and not a scruple. All I need is the proof, which was, of course, the hardest part of all. She did not do it alone, because on the 9th day, in the library, where they had first spoken, Lady Vesper found her again, and this time Vesper did not sneer. She stood at the end of the long table, watching the mortal girl surrounded by mountains of ancient books, and something in her cold face had shifted. "You've been in here every night," Vesper said. "The servants talk. They think you've gone mad. Reading dead law by candlelight like a ghost." Rowena did not look up. "Let them think it. What are you looking for?" And Rowena stopped. She set down her pen, and she made a decision that could ruin her, because Vesper had been meant for the crown. Rowena now wore, and Vesper had every reason in the world to want her gone. But Rowena had looked into this woman's eyes and seen her own reflection. A bridge, a tool, a daughter sold for someone else's ambition, and she chose against all caution to trust that. "I'm looking for the thing that's going to save my life," Rowena said, "and I think you already know part of it. Vesper went very still, so Rowena told her. All of it. The light beneath the council door, Halbrook's smooth voice, Mordecai's thick satisfaction, the plot to name the bond, false to unmake her, to hand her back like a returned parcel. And she watched Vesper's face as she spoke, watched the beautiful cold mask crack open, and what came through the crack was not surprise. It was horror. "They used me," Vesper whispered. "Halbrook came to me a month ago, said the king had made a mistake, said the mortal had trapped him, and that a true daughter of the blood might yet set it right. He said the court would rally behind me if the bond were dissolved." Her hands had begun to shake. "He made me believe I was defending Thornhaven. He made me the face of it, so that when they came for you, it would look like the pack's own choice, and not one old man's greed." "You didn't know," Rowena said quietly. "I knew I resented you." Vesper's voice was raw. "I knew I let him point that resentment wherever he liked, because it was easier than admitting the truth." She looked up, and her eyes were wet and furious and clear. "That I was never angry at you. I was angry that they got to keep deciding my worth. And he knew it. He used my whole life against me like a lever." The two women looked at each other across the table of dead law, and something passed between them that had no name. Not friendship, and yet something harder and older than that. The recognition of two people who had both been made into instruments meeting at last, on the far side of it, and deciding together to be something else. "He kept letters," Vesper said, suddenly, fierce. "Halbrook. He never trusts anyone, so he keeps everything. Proof of every bargain in case a partner turns on him. I've seen the box, in his private study." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and when she lowered it, the tiredness was gone, and something sharper had taken its place. "I can get you in. I'm still the grieving noblewoman he thinks he's using. He'll never suspect me." Rowena stared at her. "Why would you risk that for me?" And Vesper gave a small, broken, beautiful laugh. "Not for you, Mort." She lifted her chin. "For the girl I was. The one nobody ever asked. This is the first thing in my whole life I've chosen for myself." Her mouth curved. "I find I rather like it." They found the box 6 nights later. Vesper drew Halbrook into a long dinner, all wounded pride and hints that she was ready to move against the mortal at last, keeping the old man talking, while Rowena slipped into the counselor's private study with a borrowed key and a heart hammering so hard she was certain the whole castle could hear it. The box was where Vesper had said, locked. But Rowena had spent those weeks learning that locks were only another door, and she had learned patience from a lifetime of waiting, and she got it open. And inside was everything. Letters between Halbrook and Mordecai. Letters between Halbrook and her own father, Lord Aldrich of Valamore, agreeing to hand his daughter back the moment the bond was dissolved in exchange for the alliance he had wanted all along. A written plan, in Halbrook's own smooth hand, laying out the false bond accusation, step by step. The names of the 2 council members he had bribed. The date. The design. The whole rotten architecture of it written down by a man too arrogant to imagine he would ever be caught. Rowena knelt on the cold floor of the study with the proof of her own destruction in her hands, and she did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter and stranger and far more dangerous to Halbrook than triumph. She felt certain. She gathered the letters. Every one. She left the box exactly as she had found it. And she walked back through the sleeping halls of Thornhaven with a lifetime's worth of another man's greed folded against her chest. and for the first time since she had arrived in that gray and beautiful city, she was not afraid of the full moon. She was waiting for it. Kaelin returned 2 days before the rite. She felt him through the bond. Before she saw him, that steady warmth flooding back into the empty place in her chest, and she had to press her hand to her heart in the corridor and simply breathe for a moment at how much she had missed it. He found her in their chambers that evening, and he stopped in the doorway, and he looked at her, and through the bond, he felt at once that something had changed. "You're different," he said. "I've been busy," she said. "Rowena." He crossed the room. He took her face in his hands gently, the way he always did, as though she were something he was afraid of breaking, and she loved him for it, and she would not let him break this. "The court has been cruel to you. I felt it. Every day I was gone, I felt it through the bond, and I nearly came back a dozen times to burn the whole council to the ground for you." "I know." She covered his hands with hers. "I'm glad you didn't." He drew back surprised. "Glad. There's something happening here, Kaelin. Something Halbrook built. And I found it." She held his gaze, and she felt his instinct rise, the immediate absolute need to protect, to shield, to place himself between her and any harm. And she felt how hard it was for him to hold it back. "And I need you to trust me the way I trusted you. In that street. When you were a stranger, and I had no reason on earth to believe you." The bond went taut between them. She felt his war. The king who wanted to command. The mate who wanted to protect. And underneath both the man who had waited in a forest clearing and every day since for her to become exactly precisely the woman she was becoming now. "Tell me what you need," he said, and it cost him something to say it. She felt that, too. It cost him everything he had been raised to be, a king who solved a wolf who defended, and he set it all down and handed her the reins instead, because he understood in that moment that the greatest protection he could offer her was to let her stand on her own. "I need you to do nothing," she said softly. "At the rite. No matter what they say about me. No matter how it looks. I need you to sit on your throne and let me stand. And I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." Kaelin looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, he smiled. That rare, real smile that changed his whole face. "You're going to ruin him," he said. "Aren't you?" "I'm going to let him ruin himself," Rowena said. "I've just arranged the light he'll do it in." The rite of recognition was held beneath the full moon. The whole court gathered in the great open circle at the heart of Thornhaven, a ring of standing stones, older than the castle, older than the crown. Silver-washed under a moon so bright, it turned the whole world to bone and shadow. The wolves came in their finery, the council in their robes, and at the center of it, on a throne of dark wood and antler, sat King Kaelin still and unreadable, and beside him, an empty place where a queen might stand, if the pack would have her. Rowena walked into that circle alone. She wore no crown, no borrowed jewels. A plain gown of deep green, the color she had worn the day the mark was found, and the mark itself bare at her throat, for all of them to see. She walked in a ring of stones, under the eyes of 1,000 wolves who had already decided she was nothing, and she did not tremble, because she had stopped needing their belief to know her own worth. Counselor Halbrook rose, and his smooth, pleasant voice filled the circle. "We gather beneath the moon," he said, "to weigh the worth of the one who would be Luna. The old law is clear. A queen not born of the blood must prove herself before the pack." He turned to Rowena, and his smile was gentle, and his eyes were knives. But before we begin, this council must raise a graver matter, one that touches the very validity of the bond itself. A murmur ran through the crowd. Right on cue. Rowena said nothing. She only watched him. The way you watch a man walk toward a cliff he cannot see. It grieves me to say it, Halbrook went on, spreading his hands, the very picture of a reluctant servant of the crown. But there are witnesses. There is testimony that this mortal woman, facing a forced marriage of her own, did knowingly and deliberately ensnare our king. That she offered him gold, a fortune, in a forest in the dark, that she bought her way to the bond we are asked to honor tonight. He let the words land, let the whispers swell. Under the old law, a bond made through such deception is a false bond, and a false bond this council has the authority to dissolve, however the king may feel. He turned to the assembled council, to the two men he had bought, and they nodded grave and rehearsed. Kalen did not move on his throne, but Rowena felt the fury rolling off him through the bond, held back by a will of iron. Held back because she had asked him to, and she loved him so fiercely in that moment that it nearly broke her concentration. The mortal offered gold, Halbrook said, turning back to her, certain now closing his jaws. Does she deny it? And Rowena spoke for the first time. No, she said, clear, ringing, carrying to every stone in the circle. I don't deny it. The murmur became a roar. Halbrook's smile widened. She had walked into it. The foolish mortal had confessed. I offered him gold, Rowena said, and she let the roar die down, let the silence stretch until every ear was straining toward her. I stood in a dark street, betrayed by the man I loved, 3 days from being sold to a lord, old enough to be my grandfather, and I offered a stranger everything I owned in the world to save me from that. Yes, I did that. And if any woman here has never once been desperate enough to bargain for her own freedom, let her be the first to condemn me. The silence changed. She felt it change. Somewhere in that ring of wolves, women were listening. Women who had been bargained over, women who had been arranged, and they were leaning in. Counselor Halbrook says I schemed my way to a crown. Rowena turned slowly, addressing the whole circle now. He says I plotted, that I deceived my king for gain. She looked back at Halbrook. It's a fine word, isn't it? Scheme. It's the word powerful men use when a woman with no power finds a way to survive them. This is sentiment, Halbrook said, an edge creeping into his smooth voice. Not law. The clause of false bonding. Let's talk about the clause of false bonding. Rowena's voice cut clean across his. Since you know it so well, let's talk about all of it, including the part you left out. And Halbrook went still, just slightly, just for a heartbeat. But she saw it. The old law says a false bond may be dissolved by the council, Rowena said, walking toward him. Now unhurried, the letters she had drawn from within her cloak held loosely in one hand. But the same law says something else. It says that a false accusation of false bonding made by a servant of the crown for personal gain is the gravest betrayal a counselor can commit against the pack. She stopped before him. You read that page, counselor. I know you did. You just hoped no one else ever would. Halbrook's face had gone the color of old ash. You accuse me of... I don't accuse you. Rowena now lifted the letters. I have you. She turned to the council, to the court, to the king on his throne whose amber eyes had begun to burn. The letters, she said, and her voice rang out across the silver circle. In Counselor Halbrook's own hand. to Lord Mordecai promising him my return the moment my bond was dissolved, to my own father, Lord Aldrich of Valamore, agreeing to send me back to Mordecai in exchange for the alliance he wanted from the start. A written plan, the names of the 2 counselors he paid to stand with him tonight. She let her eyes move across the 2 men who had gone very pale, very fast. It's all here. The scheme he means to accuse me of. Except it was never mine. It was his. From the first night I set foot in this city, chaos broke across the circle. Wolves' surging voices rising, the 2 bribed counselors scrambling back from Halbrook as though he had caught fire. Lies. Halbrook snarled, the mask gone, now the smooth voice cracking. Forgeries. A mortal's desperate. They're not forgeries. A new voice, cold, clear, high-born. And Lady Vesper stepped into the circle. The whole court turned, because this was the woman Halbrook had made the face of his rebellion. This was the daughter of the blood, who was meant to replace the mortal. And she walked to Rowena's side, and she turned to face the council she had almost helped destroy an innocent woman to please. I watched him write them, Vesper said. He used me. He used my name and my grief and my family's ambition to build a wall for you all to hide behind, while he sold your queen back to the man she fled. She lifted her chin, and her voice did not shake. I was raised to be a bridge for other people to walk across. Tonight, for the first time, I decide where I stand. She looked at Rowena, and something like respect, something like kinship passed between them, and I stand with her. The silence that followed was absolute, and into it at last King Caelan rose from his throne. He did not shout. He did not need to. He walked into the circle of stones, and the fury in him was a living thing, now unleashed, rolling off him in waves that made every wolf in that ancient ring drop their eyes. Counselor Halbrook, he said, and his voice was quiet, and it was worse than any shout could have been. You plotted to steal my mate, to sell a daughter of this pack back into a cage, to use the law I swore to uphold as a knife against the woman I love. He stopped before the old man who had begun at last to shrink. You built a trap, and she caught you in it, in front of the entire court, without a single one of my hands lifted to help her. Caelan turned, and he looked at Rowena, and the pride in his eyes was so vast, so complete, that she felt it flood the bond and fill up every hollow place those gray, lonely weeks had carved in her. Do you see her? Caelan said to the court. To all of them. To the wolves who had whispered mortal, who had called her bought, who had decided her worth before she spoke a word. You asked her to prove she was worthy of being your Luna, and she has just proven she is worthy of being your queen. Not because I chose her, because she saved herself, and in doing so, she saved this pack from the rot in its own council. He raised his voice, and it carried to the farthest stone. The right of recognition is complete. Rowena of Valamore has proven her worth beyond any question this law can ask. She is your Luna, and any wolf who says otherwise may say it to me. No one said otherwise, because there was nothing left to say. The judgments came swiftly in the days that followed. Halbrook was stripped of his title, his lands, his name exiled from every realm that owed Thornhaven fealty, sent out, with nothing exactly as he had planned to send out Rowena. Mordecai, named in the letters, exposed before the whole North, fled to whatever hole would still have a disgraced lord, and no house of standing ever received him again. The 2 bribed counselors lost their seats, and their honor both. But there were 2 reckonings still waiting for her, and both of them lay south. Corwin had sat in the cells of Valamore since the night Kaelin felt her pain across the bond, and ordered his arrest, and her father still ruled the house that had made her. So when the last of Thornhaven's business was settled, Rowena rode south again back to the castle she had fled in the dark, to close the doors she had left open behind her. Kaelin rode at her side. Vesper, too. And this time, Rowena did not enter Valamore as a prize or a runaway or a fool. She entered it as its equal and more, and Corwin was brought at last to answer for what he had done. Rowena chose to be there, because she needed to look at him one last time. Not for revenge, for something else. For proof to herself that the wound had closed. He looked smaller than she remembered. Thinner. His eyes darted around the hall full of watching faces, and when they found her seated beside the king, with Aluna's mark bare at her throat, she watched the understanding hit him all at once. The lovesick fool he had planned to rob and abandon in the woods was a queen, and he was in chains. Rowena, he said. Her name in his mouth was a plea now, where once it had been a private joke shared with two laughing men in a tavern. Rowena, please. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know you'd become. That's the difference between us, Corwin, she said. And her voice was calm. Astonishingly calm. She searched herself for the old pain as she spoke, and she found it, but faint now, a scar and not a wound. You didn't know who I was, but you knew who you were. You knew what you meant to do to me, and you did it laughing. He had no answer. I loved you, she said, quietly, not cruelly. I gave you every letter, every promise, my whole trusting heart. And you called it stupid. You called me a fool for daring to hope. She rose from her seat, and she walked toward him, and she stopped a few feet away, and she looked at the man who had once been her whole ruined world. But here's what you never understood. Being brave enough to trust, brave enough to hope. That was never my weakness. It was my strength, because when you broke me, I was still brave enough to try again. And the second time, I chose better. She looked at him, and she waited for the tears, the grief, the old crushing ache. And they did not come. Only pity, clean and complete. The pity you feel for a man who traded a chance at something real for a purse of gold, and will spend the rest of his life with neither. I feel nothing when I look at you, she said, wondering at the truth of it, even as she spoke it. Not love, not hate, nothing at all. And that's how I know I'm free of you. She turned and walked back to her place beside the king. And she did not look at Corwin again. I was exiled as the others were, marked as a traitor, sent out from all the lands of Thornhaven and its allies with nothing in his hands. And when the doors closed behind him, Rowena felt something inside her quietly, finally let go. It was over, all of it, and she had not needed anyone to end it for her. She sent for her father before she left Valamore for the last time, because there was one wound still open, older than Corwin, older than the mark old, as her whole life. And she had learned in those weeks of dead law and moonlit courage that a wound you refuse to face will follow you into every room you ever enter. Lord Aldrich came into the chamber carefully. He seemed smaller than she remembered. Older. The powerful lord who had ruled her whole world had somehow shrunk in the space of a season. And when he looked at her, at the daughter seated in a chair while he stood there, was something in his face she had never once seen there before. Fear, and beneath it, shame. Sit, she said. Not cruelly, but it was not a request, and he obeyed. Lord Aldrich of Valamore, who obeyed no one sat because his daughter told him to. And that alone said everything that needed saying about how much the world had turned. "You sold me," Rowena said, calm, heavy with of a truth 20 years in the making. "As though I were livestock, something to be traded to the highest bidder. You raised me to be a tool, and when I stopped being useful the way you wanted, you sold me to the vilest man you could find." He opened his mouth. She raised a hand, and he fell silent. "You'll listen," she said. "For the first time in my life, you'll truly listen." And he did. "I survived it," she said. "Not because of you. In spite of you. I found my own courage. I made my own choices. I built my own way out of the cage you built for me. And then I stood in a circle of stones and saved myself from the last trap you helped set." She let that land. Let him feel the shape of what he had done. "You wrote a letter, Father, to Halbrook, agreeing to send me back to Mordecai. Did you know that letter is what damned him? Your betrayal is the thing that set me free." Aldrich's face crumpled, and to Rowena's astonishment, his eyes filled. Not with the manipulator's practiced grief she had seen him wield on others. With something raw, something real. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "Rowena, I am so sorry." She waited. She did not help him. She did not soften. "Not only for selling you," he went on, forcing the words out as though each one cost him. "Though God knows I regret it, but for never seeing you. In 20 years I never once asked what you wanted. I looked at you, and I saw a piece on a board, an alliance, a move, never a daughter." He wiped his eyes roughly, and his hands were shaking. "I did what my father did to me, and his father to him. I never stopped to ask if it was cruel. I just followed the pattern because it was easier than questioning it. And you deserved a father who would break the pattern for you, who would protect you instead of selling you. And I failed you completely." Rowena felt something tighten in her chest. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not fully. The scars he had left ran too deep for a single tearful apology to smooth them away. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not now. Maybe not ever all the way. What you did left marks on me that no crown will cover." "I know," he whispered. "But..." She rose, and she crossed to him, and she looked down at the man who had loomed so large over her whole childhood and seemed now so terribly small. "I won't carry this weight for the rest of my life either. I won't let what you did define who I am. I've spent too long letting other people set the measure of me. I'm not going to hand you that power just so I can hate you with it." She laid a hand on his shoulder. Brief, but real. The first time she had touched her father with anything but obedience in longer than she could remember. "I don't owe you a daughter's love anymore," she said softly. "But I give you back your humanity. You are my father. That doesn't change. Who we are to each other from here on, though, that will depend on you, on the choices you make, on whether you can learn this late to see me." He looked up at her, and he wept. Lord Aldrich of Valamore, who had traded his only child for land, wept in a quiet chamber, and wept for the daughter he had never let himself know. Rowena did not weep with him. She had done her weeping. She had done it in a tavern doorway, and a forest clearing, and weeks of gray, and lonely halls. And she was done. "Goodbye, Father," she said. "Not farewell. Not until next time. Goodbye. Final. Clean." The closing of a door that had held her trapped for 20 years, shut now gently and forever by her own hand. She found Kaelin in the courtyard the next morning, waiting beside the carriage that would carry her home. Home. Thornhaven. The gray and beautiful city that had received her so coldly, and would she knew now learn to love her, because she had given it no other choice. Vesper was there too, mounted and ready, because Rowena had asked her to come, and Vesper had said yes before the question was fully out. Not a bridge anymore. A friend chosen freely, the first true one either woman had ever had. And Kaelin watched Rowena cross the courtyard toward him, and through the bond, she felt him take her in the changed set of her shoulders, the peace in her face, and she felt his wonder at it. "There's something I have never told you," he said quietly when she reached him. "Something I've held since the first night, and I think you already know it. But I want to say it. Now, when you're free and calm and yours." She waited. "When you ran into me in that street," he said, "before I knew your name, before you'd spoken a word, my whole being knew you. The bond you asked me to make. The claiming bond. It was never only that." He took her hands. "You are my mate, Rowena, chosen by the moon before either of us was born. I felt it the instant you fell against me. I knew you were mine, and I was yours, and that it was written in something older than any law." And Rowena felt the truth of it move through her, and she found to her own quiet astonishment that it did not frighten her. Because there had been a time it would have. A time when the word mate chosen, written before you were born, would have felt like one more cage. One more thing decided for her. One more fate handed down without her leave. And she would have fought it the way she fought everything that tried to own her. "You knew," she said slowly, "that first night. You knew and you didn't tell me." "I didn't tell you," he agreed, "because if I had, you would never have chosen me. You'd have thought about fate, about what you owed it, whether the pull was real or only a story your grandmother told. You'd have stopped being honest and started being careful." His thumbs moved over her knuckles. "And I wanted one moment, Rowena, just one, where someone chose me without knowing what came with it, where the choice was only about me, and where you healed enough to choose again, freely knowing everything." She understood. God help her, she understood completely. Because he had done for her the one thing no one else in her whole life had ever done. Her father, who arranged her. Corwin, who deceived her. Even fate itself, which had bound her before she could speak. Every one of them had decided for her. And Kaelin, the most powerful man in all the werewolf realms. A king who could have simply claimed her and let her live with it. He had waited. He had let her be desperate, and then let her be brave, and then let her be lonely, and then let her save herself all, so that when she finally chose him, the choice would be truly, entirely, unquestionably her own. So it was never really a bargain, she said. The gold, the bond, any of it. No. His amber eyes held hers. It was fate dressed up as a choice, so that you could make it a choice for real. He smiled that rare and devastating smile. You bought a husband of convenience, Rowena, and you have no idea. You paid a pouch of gold for the one thing in this world I would have given every kingdom I own to have. You, choosing me. And Rowena laughed, a real one. Surprised out of her, the way laughter always came when she was with him, bright and unguarded in the cold morning air. You let me try to buy you, she said, the richest king in the lands. You stood there and let me offer you my little purse of coins like a merchant at market. "It was," Kaelin said gravely, "the finest bargain of my life." She reached up and touched his face the way he was always touching hers, and she felt the whole of it settle into place inside her. The bond, the fate, the choice. All of it no longer a chain, but a thing she was reaching out to take with both hands of her own free will, because she wanted it, because she had healed enough to know the difference between a cage and a home, and because for the first time in her life, no one was deciding anything for her at all. "I choose you," she said, "not because the moon wrote it, not because I was desperate, not because you're a king, or because you saved me, because you didn't. I saved myself, and we both know it." Her voice was steady and clear and entirely her own. "I choose you because I know exactly what comes with it now, and I want it anyway. All of it. You, this, a life that's mine." Kaelin pressed his forehead to hers, and through the bond, she felt something in him that she had no words for, something vast and quiet and shining. The feeling of a man who had waited his whole life for a heartbeat that was no longer missing from his chest. "Then come home," he said. And she did. Rowena did not look back at Valamor as the carriage rolled through its gates for the last time. There was no reason to. Her past was sealed and signed and delivered. Her father had his apology, and her boundaries, and a chance he had not earned, but that she had chosen freely to give. Corwin was gone. Mordecai was ruined. Hal was nothing. And the girl who had once sat before a mirror and not recognized her own frightened face was gone, too, replaced by a woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she was worth, and would never again let another living soul decide it for her. Through the window, she watched Kaelin ride beside the carriage. Blonde hair catching the risen sun, and Vesper riding at his other side, the two of them talking easily, now the enemy who had become an ally, who had become a friend. My king, she thought. My friend. My chosen life. "Where have your thoughts gone, my lady?" asked Tilda, who sat across from her come north to serve the mistress she had once helped flee into the dark. Rowena touched the mark at her throat, still humming with the steady pulse of the man riding beside her. "To the future," she said. "Only to the future." And as the carriage carried her toward Thornhaven, toward her city and her crown, and the whole unwritten life ahead of her, Rowena closed her eyes and let the bond wrap around her like sunlight. For the first time in her life, she was not running from something. She was running toward it, and she had chosen every step of the road herself.